I want you to picture a scenario that is, um, it's probably going to feel a little too relatable.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Imagine you are sitting in your car, you are gripping the steering wheel, running a few minutes late, because of course you are,
Hmm.
and the traffic light ahead of you turns yellow, and then inevitably, undeniably, it turns red.
The absolute worst timing, always.
Always. Now imagine you just lose your mind. I mean, you start screaming at the glass, slamming your hands on the dashboard, taking this red light deeply, deeply personally.
Like they planned it just for you.
Exactly. You act as if the city planners specifically designed this intersection at this exact moment in time just to ruin your Tuesday.
Right.
If you were standing on the sidewalk watching someone do that in their car, you would think they were absolutely insane. You would think, wow, it is just a light. It is just traffic.
Mhm.
It happens to everyone.
It's a completely universal experience.
But you take the red lights of life personally. But what if that red light is actually the exact detour you needed to take? Welcome to episode 11 in our ongoing deep dive series on the book The Obstacle is the Way. Let's unpack this, because our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how to stop fighting the traffic lights of life and start actually mastering the detour.
The visual of someone screaming in their car is, well, it is such a powerful place to start because it strips away all of our daily rationalizations and it exposes the core absurdity of how we process frustration.
Yeah, it really does.
Just think about the actual mechanics of that moment. Arguing with a blocked intersection or, screaming at a piece of traffic hardware, it does absolutely nothing to rid you of the problem.
Not a single thing.
The red light is entirely indifferent to your anger. The photons hitting your retina do not care about your schedule.
That is a great way to put it. The photons do not care.
They really don't. But understanding this concept, truly internalizing that the obstacle is indifferent to your emotional state, well, it fundamentally changes the way you travel through life.
Because you stop wasting that energy.
Exactly. You stop hemorrhaging your mental energy on the screaming, and you start actively redirecting that energy into navigation.
Right.
It changes the duration of your trip, it changes your baseline stress levels, and, over a long enough timeline, it changes who you become when you face adversity.
That shift, going from screaming to navigating, that is the perfect bridge into the big idea we are exploring today, which is the discipline of the will.
A huge concept.
It really is.
Hmm.
We have talked extensively in previous discussions about perception and perception and action are essentially disciplines of the mind and the body.
Right, how we frame things mentally and what physical steps we take in response.
Exactly. But the will, this is something much deeper. The will is the discipline of the heart and the soul. It is our internal power, the one true trump card we hold, because it is the only thing that can never, ever be forcibly impacted by external events. But I have a question here.
Sure.
I hear bear and forbear, but let us apply this to something incredibly messy and real.
Okay.
If my boss is actively stealing my credit at work, or, say, a business partner lies to me, choosing acceptance just feels like being a doormat.
Right, it feels completely passive.
Totally. Where is the line between acquiescence and surrender? How does someone actually find this quiet humility without just becoming totally passive to the cruelty of the world?
That is the defining tension of ancient philosophy, and honestly, it is where the modern interpretation often falls completely flat.
How so?
While the Stoics had a maxim for dealing with this friction, sustine absedes, which translates to bear and forbear, this is the art of acquiescence.
Okay.
But we have to rigorously define what acquiescence means here, because in this context, it is absolutely not surrender.
So it isn't just giving up and taking it.
Not at all. It is not letting a toxic boss walk all over you while you smile politely. Acquiescence is simply choosing objective acceptance of reality instead of burning your energy on resentment.
Ah, I see the difference.
When your boss steals your credit, resentment sounds like, I cannot believe they did this. It shouldn't be this way. Life is so unfair.
Which just traps you.
Exactly. That internal monologue traps you in the past. Acquiescence, on the other hand, sounds like, my boss took my credit. That is the baseline reality of my current situation. The obstacle is here.
Just stating the facts.
Right. By stripping away the emotional resistance to the mere existence of the problem, you free up 100% of your cognitive resources to take strategic action.
Like what kind of action?
Like quietly gathering documentation, updating your resume, or confronting them professionally. What's fascinating here is how the Stoics conceptualized the psychological defense mechanism for this exact mindset. They called it the inner citadel.
The inner citadel. Wow. Just the phrasing alone evokes this image of impenetrable architecture.
Yes, it really does.
It sounds like a place where the chaos of the outside world simply cannot reach.
It is an internal fortress, built specifically so that no external adversity can break your spirit. But the crucial mechanism behind the inner citadel is that you are not born with it.
Right, you have to build it yourself.
Exactly. Nobody is born a gladiator, and nobody is born with a fully fortified mind. The inner citadel has to be intentionally constructed, brick by brick, and then actively, continuously reinforced through exposure.
You have to maintain it.
Yes. You build this fortress inside of yourself so that when the external world inevitably descends into chaos, you have a sanctuary of quiet fortitude to retreat to.
That makes a lot of sense.
There is a deeply moving parallel to this architectural resilience in the Jewish faith, actually, specifically from the Haggadah, which is the text read during the Passover Seder.
Oh, interesting.
There is a central line that dictates in every generation, a person is obligated to view himself as if he were the one who went out of Egypt. It is a profound psychological tool for internalizing resilience. By actively remembering and embodying the historical survival of immense hardship, individuals are constantly reinforcing their own internal fortress.
They are making that history their own.
Yes, they are reminding themselves at a cellular level of what human beings are capable of enduring and overcoming.
That completely shifts the perspective on how we view history.
Yeah.
I mean, generational storytelling isn't just a recounting of facts. It is a psychological anchor.
Precisely.
When you internalize the survival of those who came before you, you are forcefully contextualizing your own struggles. You realize that humans are fundamentally built to endure.
Which changes everything.
It really does, which means your delayed flight or your stressful presentation isn't an existential threat. Here's where it gets really interesting, because if we take that idea of the inner citadel and apply it to our daily lives, it means we cannot wait until the city is actively under siege to start pouring the concrete.
No, you absolutely cannot.
We have to build this citadel and reinforce our armor plating during the good times. It is the psychological equivalent of running fire drills during peacetime.
That is a great analogy.
You do not wait until the office building is actively burning to start wandering the hallways looking for an exit sign.
Right, you would be panicked.
You practice when the environment is completely calm, when the stakes are low, so that when the alarms are blaring and your heart rate spikes to 150 beats per minute, your muscle memory simply takes over. We have to purposefully subject ourselves to difficult things so we can depend on that reinforced strength when our worst nightmares actually materialize.
To be truly formidable at anything requires deliberate practice, and overcoming adversity is no exception. The human brain naturally seeks comfort, which means you have to actively train it to handle discomfort.
So how do we actually do that?
You have to learn the mechanics of being entirely okay with being alone. You have to purposefully expose yourself to uncertainty, and you must willingly invite pressure into your life.
Because life guarantees those things anyway.
Life absolutely guarantees that you will face loneliness, uncertainty, and pressure eventually. By seeking out those small, controlled discomforts now, whether that is taking a freezing cold shower, fasting, or having a difficult conversation you would rather avoid, you are actively welding new layers of armor plating onto your inner citadel.
There is a stark contrast presented in the text regarding that exact concept, and it forces you to completely reevaluate your daily choices.
Yes, it is very confronting.
It essentially states, if you do what is difficult, your life will be easy. But if you do what is easy, your life will be difficult.
It is such a powerful truth.
If you consistently choose the path of least resistance, if you avoid the hard conversations, if you hit snooze instead of working out, if you numb yourself instead of facing your anxieties, life eventually corners you.
It always catches up.
The compound interest of all those easy choices creates a reality that is incredibly difficult to live in. But if you voluntarily lean into the hard things, life itself becomes so much easier to navigate because your baseline for what constitutes a crisis is so much higher. But building this theoretical fortress in your mind isn't enough if you don't know where the enemy is attacking from.
Right.
That's where I think the Stoics had a brilliant tactical advantage over how we operate today. We are all familiar with project postmortems where a launch fails and everyone sits around a conference table pointing fingers and trying to figure out what went wrong after the damage is already done.
Yes, the classic corporate postmortem.
Right. But the Stoics inverted this with a micro-habit called premeditatio malorum, which translates to the premeditation of evils.
The modern equivalent being the premortem.
Exactly. Before you undertake any plan, whether you are Launching a startup, planning a wedding, or just mapping out a busy weekend. You sit down and you purposefully envision exactly what could go wrong in advance. You actively probe your own plans for structural weaknesses.
The pre-mortem is a phenomenal cognitive exercise because it alters how your brain processes failure. To make it highly actionable, you use a very specific mental framework.
Walk us through that.
You sit quietly and you ask yourself the question, what if? And then you immediately anchor it with a contingency. Then I will. Or instead, I'll just...
Okay, so give me an example.
So you visualize the airport.
Yeah.
What if the flight gets canceled? Then I will march over to the rental car counter and drive.
Simple enough.
Right. What if the primary client absolutely hates the pitch deck? Instead, I'll just pull up the raw backup data we compiled and pivot the presentation into a collaborative workshop.
You already have the backup plan ready.
Yes. What if a thunderstorm wipes out the outdoor seating for the event? No problem. We can immediately move everyone into the indoor pavilion.
I love that.
But this raises an important question. Does doing this mental exercise magically make the problem easier to deal with?
Right, because it is still raining.
Exactly. If it rains, the outdoor setup is still ruined. The physical reality of the obstacle remains completely unchanged. But what the premortem actually does is force your mind to adjust to reality instead of clinging to your fragile, optimistic expectations.
That makes logical sense. But let me challenge the psychological toll of that. Doesn't expecting the worst all the time just lead to chronic anxiety?
It is a common concern.
I mean, if I spend my morning vividly imagining my flight getting canceled, my client hating me, and my event getting rained out, aren't I just marinating my brain in cortisol before I even leave the house?
It sounds exhausting when you frame it that way.
Right. How is that not just a recipe for perpetual pessimism?
It is a brilliant question because the line between anxiety and preparation seems incredibly thin, but neurologically they are entirely different processes.
Okay, explain that.
Chronic anxiety is characterized by a feeling of helplessness in the face of the unknown. When your brain faces a novel, unexpected threat, the amygdala, the fear center of your brain, hijacks your nervous system, triggering a visceral fight-or-flight response.
That is the panic we all feel.
Yes, that is panic. But a premortem does the exact opposite. By visualizing the failure in a safe, controlled environment, you are essentially engaging in self-directed exposure therapy.
Oh, wow.
You move the potential threat from the emotional limbic system into the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logic and planning.
So you were thinking rationally instead of emotionally.
Exactly. You are mapping out a concrete solution before the problem even exists. So when the flight actually does get canceled, your amygdala doesn't freak out because the brain recognizes the scenario.
It has already lived it.
It says, oh, we have seen this movie before and we already have the script for the rental car. You are down-regulating your panic response through familiarity.
You are removing the shock value of failure.
Exactly.
When we expect everything to go perfectly, any minor deviation feels like a Greek tragedy. We waste precious hours mourning the death of our perfect plan.
Yes, we get so stuck on what should have happened.
But when we pre-compute failure, when we acknowledge that people are fundamentally flawed and will absolutely make mistakes that screw up our timelines, we are no longer blindsided. We have already mourned the perfect plan in advance, which means the moment the detour happens, we can instantly get back to the task at hand. We are completely prepared for defeat, but perfectly positioned for success.
That is the profound shift. It is the transition from a passive posture of hope for the best, prepare for the worst, into an active, strategic meditation on reality.
Yeah.
And this entire philosophical mindset, the discipline of anticipating the obstacles, accepting the constraints of the physical world, and viewing these detours not as fatal roadblocks, but as entirely new directions, well, it requires a specific fluidity.
Fluidity.
Yes, it requires you to adapt to the container you are poured into, much like water. There's a standout thought from the philosopher Sir Francis Bacon that anchors this exact necessity.
What did he say?
He wrote, "Nature, in order to be commanded, must be obeyed."
Nature, in order to be commanded, must be obeyed.
Yes.
That feels like a paradox at first glance, but it perfectly encapsulates everything we are talking about. You cannot bully reality into submitting to your preferences.
No, you can't. If we connect this to the bigger picture, what Bacon is really illustrating is that the constraints we fight against in life are actually the very engines of our progress, provided we can accept them.
Okay, how so?
Consider the physical law of gravity. Gravity is the ultimate non-negotiable constraint of nature. It holds us down. Now, If you want to fly, if you want to command the skies, you cannot simply ignore gravity.
Obviously not.
You certainly cannot scream at it like the driver screaming at the red light. Gravity does not care about your desire to fly.
It's totally indifferent.
You have to obey its rules, you have to study aerodynamics, understand lift and drag, and use the sheer force of gravity itself to engineer an aircraft.
Wow.
By obeying the reality of our circumstances, we are pushed into corners that force us to develop skills, resilience, and innovations we would never, ever pursue if life were entirely frictionless.
I wouldn't have to.
Exactly. We master a terrible situation not by fighting the reality of its existence, but by respecting its rules, adapting our timeline, and changing our approach.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. You don't beat gravity by fighting it. You beat it by building wings. You literally use the constraint to generate lift. An airplane requires air resistance to take off. The obstacle literally becomes the mechanism for flight.
It is a beautiful mechanism.
It takes real toughness and incredible humility to face necessity like that. To look at a devastating situation where your options are completely constrained and have the presence of mind to say, okay, these are the new rules of reality. How do I play this new game?
Right.
Because the absolute truth of the matter is that all external events, no matter how chaotic, no matter how disruptive or deeply frustrating they feel in the moment, can be equally beneficial to us. Every single one of them holds utility. They can teach us the exact lessons in patience, resilience, or strategy that we have been entirely reluctant to learn on our own.
They force our hand.
So what does this all mean? It means I want to challenge you to pull back and look at the macro picture. When you hit that red light, when the detour forces you off the highway and into unfamiliar territory, remember the incredibly long timeline of your life. This current obstacle, this thing that feels so massive, so heavy, and so infuriating right now, is only a microscopic bump on a very, very long road. You have the inner citadel. You have the capacity to pre-compute your failures. You have the resilience to handle whatever occurs.
And I will leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. You do not have to actually like something in order to master it.
That is so true.
You do not have to enjoy sitting in the traffic jam. You do not have to like working with that profoundly difficult coworker. And you certainly do not have to be happy about your canceled flight. But you do have to accept their reality in order to navigate them effectively. So what is the one current frustration in your life, that one roadblock you have been screaming at from behind the glass that you can stop resenting and start mastering today?
That is the perfect question to leave hanging in the air. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. If this conversation helped you rethink the roadblocks in your own life, please remember to like and subscribe to get notified about the next episode. We will see you next time, and until then, keep building that citadel.